groundbreaking research on messaging and framing of messages, and he is a noted linguist, and Scott is one as well. So I think what we have to offer you today is not only an expert in listening, who is somebody who's done an awful lot of listening around our state, and an expert in messaging and in framing good messages. So we're going to come at you from a couple of different angles or vantage points. And I just wanted to say that I probably come from a vantage point that is somewhat of a hybrid of what you'll hear. And what I've found as I've traveled the state of Wisconsin is that even if you listen and listen well and understand where people are coming from, and you craft a message that speaks to those people's concerns, there's still a very strong chance that your message will be rejected if people don't trust the messenger. And that's a challenge for all of us. One of my observations about people who call themselves progressives or liberals or people on the left in general is they are very fond of facts. And they have great faith that if you stuff enough facts down people's throats, you'll eventually persuade them of the rightness of your position. And what I've experienced is that you can have all the facts that you could possibly possess, and you could share all of those facts with great skill, expressing it all very artfully. And if people don't trust you, they're still going to reject all those facts and hold on to the conclusions they've already reached. And one article of faith that I keep running into, and I do want to start this conversation by challenging you all to think about it. One article of faith on the left is that there are voters, urban and rural, but all working class voters, who are voting against their own interests. I run into it everywhere I go. These voters are voting against their own interests. I challenge that idea. They are not stupid people, and they are not voting against their own interests. It is true they see their interests differently than you see their interests, but that doesn't mean they're voting against their own interests. They see their interests in a particular way, and it's my belief that we have to come to better understand how they see their interests before they could be made a better offer than the offers they've been made by politicians up to this point. And the last thought that I'll leave you with as we open this, because I want to really turn this into a two-way conversation as quickly as possible, so I don't want to say very much to open, is that we focus a lot on having those facts, gathering information, making persuasive arguments. But just an observation, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And if they don't think you care about them, or if they think you look down on them, or if they think you disrespect them, or if they just don't think you understand them, what you say to them could make perfect sense, but they reject it because of the messenger. Because they think those are just words, and that person doesn't know me, doesn't care about me, isn't really concerned about what I'm struggling with, and I'm not going to trust what they say because I don't trust the messenger. We've got to take that to heart. And part of the answer, I think, comes from what Kathy has unearthed for us, what Scott is advancing as he works with people around the state. So enough from me. I first want to turn it over to Kathy to make some opening remarks, and then Scott, and then we will turn it into a two-way conversation from there. So thanks again for coming. Kathy Cramer.
Hi everybody, I'm Kathy Kathy Cramer, and I know a lot of you have been here all day, so I'm not going to repeat much of what I said this morning. But I'll just start off by just 100% agreeing with what Mike just said. And that thing of conveying to people that you respect them before they'll hear anything that you have to say, I think is very real. And I'll tell you one story that's not from my field work in Wisconsin, but it's from an experience I've had since the presidential election. I was invited to speak with a very high-level group of Democrats in the country, and I experienced them interacting with a small group of people who had openly said that they voted for Trump. And some of these folks in this small group said Hillary Clinton was going to take away our guns. And immediately, these high-level elected officials in the Democratic Party said, she didn't say that, and leaned over to one another and said, see, that's the problem. And I thought, what a missed opportunity. This is a closed meeting. There's no media in the room. This is your chance not to say you're wrong, but instead to say, tell me why you think that, right? Where did that come from? Why do you think that? And it was a reminder to me of just how important it is for, those of us at the grassroots on up elected office to pause for a moment and try to bring down the defenses long enough to ask, why do you think the way you do? Or what are you thinking? Or what are you concerned about? And I say that because in my own fieldwork of spending time with people around the state, I've had the luxury of doing that, right? I have this great job that allows me to drive around and invite myself into conversations and spend time with people. Most people don't have that luxury. It's not in most people's job description to walk around and drive around and have coffee with people in gas stations, right? But I do know how great it feels to actually take the time and sit across from somebody and say, tell me what your big concerns are, and to have them, the light bulb go on in their eyes that, oh, she really is here to listen to me, right? It's very meaningful to people when we reach out and say, I just want to learn from you. I just want to know what you're thinking. The part that I struggle with is listening to folks. You are conveying respect when you do that, which I think is really important and really valuable. But there's a lot of concern these days that if I stop and pause and listen to perspectives that I find just morally reprehensive, am I conveying respect? I think it's a great question, but I think the morally reprehensible parts of the views of ordinary people are getting a lot of attention, and the rest of their views that are very similar to what we all experience are getting less attention. By that I mean there's humanity to everybody, and there can be some reprehensible parts too, right? So I think I very much advocating trying to listen to folks. I very much advocate listening to folks face to face, because I think there's something about what kind of going to a person or a group of people conveys in terms of respect and just your sincerity in wanting to hear what they have to say. But I want to share one thing that we may come back around to in the conversation. One thing that's happened to me since the election is I've had just an amazing amount of correspondence from people I've never met who said, I read your book, I heard you talk, I saw you do this, and they just sort of open up to me and tell me what they're thinking, and it's been fabulous and fascinating and eye-opening. And a lot of times what I get is people's stories about what's going on in their own lives or what they're trying to do to try to heal our democracy. And one of the things I've learned about is an effort that's being done through social media. So I'm talking about face-to-face interaction being really important, but I think we can't forget the power of social media, right? And so there's this effort called Love Wisconsin. It's this fabulous kind of Facebook-oriented effort that is about Wisconsin. It's about telling the stories of people of Wisconsin in a way to bring them together into conversation so that we can be not quite so divisive. And I want to just point out to you that Jet Waller is one of the founders of this awesome effort, and she's sitting here in the front row. So, catch her afterward if you're interested. I don't know much about social media metrics, but I know that this effort has gotten a lot of attention. They have over 500,000 people a month looking at their stories. Facebook has recognized them as in the top 5% of all Facebook pages globally in terms of engagement, which means not just clicking and putting in the URL, but actually engaging with the content. So there are a lot of things that are taking place right now that are positive in terms of getting people to talk to one another across what we traditionally call divides. But I too am interested in the conversation more than hearing myself speak. So I'm gonna pass it on to Scott, but it's great to be with you all today.
Wow, so I'm honored to be in the room with these two people, and many of you who know me, if you want to get into cognitive framing and the science of it and that kind of thing, I have a session after this all by myself. So I'm not gonna spend a lot of time talking about that, because what Mike and Kathy, the brilliance of their work has pointed out something that we have all missed over the last 30 years. And that is that we all share something in common. It just doesn't get talked about enough, and that's our values. And when I talk about values, I'm not talking about you care about public education, or you care about health care for all, or you care about women's health, or you care about whatever it is. Those are all issues, okay? When I'm talking about values, I'm talking about who you really are at your core. And the brilliance of what Kathy has done is it's pointed out to us, not that as progressives, we don't have a rural white man problem. We have a problem with connecting with people. And this election just started to bridge the gap, showing that this whole urban-rural divide is something that we've all contributed to create. So before we get to discussion, I want to make 2 points and then we'll open it up. The first one is, I'm going to challenge each of you right now for the next week to not post anything negative about a Republican on any of your social media pages. Now you're all laughing, but I'm dead serious about this. Because the people that voted for Donald Trump, they're not mean, greedy, and stupid. They're human beings, and they have needs, and they have values, and they have things that they care about. Guess what? It's your fault that you're not connecting with them. So that's a challenge, okay? The second thing is, from research, we know what is an effective way to reach people. If you want to connect with someone, really reach them and inspire them, like Martin Luther King did when he said, "I have a dream." Okay? Notice he said, "I have a dream," not "I have a plan." Okay? Almost everyone in this room, and people who aren't in this room, who are maybe at a conservative conference or something like that, a lot of you have the same dreams. You just want a better life for yourself and your family. So the way to connect with people is twofold. First of all, talk about your values and beliefs. Talk about the things you care about from your heart. And again, not issues. Okay? The second thing is, give them something positive to believe in. Because if you give people a positive vision to believe in, like Donald Trump did, you will inspire and motivate people. Guess what happens when you go negative? Exactly. Okay? You push people away. So what does that say about our current state of political communications? So a couple challenges for you before we open it up is just acknowledge that the work that these two people are doing is telling us we all have common connections. We all have things we care about. And then find ways to connect with people. Find somebody in your community who voted for Donald Trump and start talking to them about what democracy really means to them. Talk to them about what freedom means and what a prosperous community looks like. Don't go up to them and say, "Hi, I'm a Democrat." Right? Or don't say, "Hi, I want to talk to you about gun control." Okay? Talk about things that you have in common and start building relationships. Okay? That's how we overcome hatred and fear. So with that, we'll open it up for questions, and I'm just thrilled to be here. Thanks.
Your turn, folks.
Sit on the table.
Yeah, come on in, everybody. Yeah, go ahead, Don.
Yeah, I'm just curious, something I heard in another session too. How much, Kathy, especially with your experience, how much does the right setting matter in terms of people being able to communicate with each other and understand each other?
Food helps. It really does, right? I mean, for drawing people in and for there to be something else to focus on in those uncomfortable moments. I think there's a lot to be said about the right setting, and I think the elements of the setting that help are food and just a bare minimum of willingness to be there, right? If it's a group of people who have all, entered into a room because they want to be there for some reason, it helps, as opposed to making people have an uncomfortable discussion, right? But other than that, it can be a wide range of places, right? High school classroom to a gas station, right? So
All the meetings that you had, were you just walking to somebody, or did you set up any meetings?
I set up a few, but most of them, and they were just a few where I found somebody and I said, "Can you get together a group of friends that I can then hang out with you?" But most of the time, I'm just showing up without letting them know I'm coming ahead of time. And even then, people are very willing to talk for the most part. So, it can be anything. And I'll just give you a few other examples of things I've heard about. Not that I've tried, but one of the examples I've heard about is this woman who's really concerned about democracy, and she's driving vintage cars around the United States because she's found that people like to talk about vintage cars. And so she shows up at a place and people say, "Hey, nice car, where are you from?" And then they start having talks about politics. So I think the venue can range widely.
Just a thought to add to what Kathy just said too. Every time I go and speak to a progressive audience, love you people. Somebody will say, "Well, where are all the young people? There's so much gray in the room." Or where are the blacks? Or where are the Hispanic? Why isn't the room more diverse? I think it's really important to remember that if you want to talk to young people, you got to go to them. They won't come to us. They're not going to come to an old person's gathering. And if you want to interact with racial minorities, you got to they don't own your group. They don't feel a sense of ownership or a sense of belonging. They've got their own groups. Get yourself invited to their group. Attend one of their meetings. Go to them. Don't expect them to come to you. And yet I hear that all the time. Where are the young people? Or where are the minorities? Where is this group or that group? They're in their own groups, in their own settings, and you got to go to them. And what I found is begging an American Legion to invite me to come and speak has been really effective. I get to go out and talk to a group of veterans, or getting myself invited to high school classrooms or to college campuses. I get to talk to young people, and convincing somebody to invite me to a Rotary Club. I get to go and talk to local business people. And you get to be in a different environment talking to people who have very different views than the views that would probably be reflected in this room if we aired out all of our beliefs and talked about all of our issues. So that's the other thing I would say is it's not just the proper setting that you need, and food does help, but it's also a willingness to go to somebody else's turf.
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
When you say food, what about alcohol?
Well, I've been to They got these drinking liberally chapters all over the place, and and I think,
They all think the same.
Yeah,
of
right.
course.
Right.
What if you get a
Well,
group where you have conservatives and liberals together drinking?
and I've gotten to speak at a lot of taverns and bowling alleys, and those are good places to meet people too. I'm a big believer in meeting people in taverns.
And I'm not that brave, so.
I'm not even a drinker. It's a good place to meet people.
But I just want to mention one thing that, a lot of times people hear about this thing that I've done of driving around the state and inviting myself into conversations. They think I'm the most extroverted person ever, right? I'm actually extremely shy. And I've had a lot of practice speaking, so I don't come across as that shy anymore. But I think it's helpful for you all to know that, I still, when I'm going to a group that they don't know I'm coming, I do have to take a deep breath and sometimes like have a piece of chocolate or something. Really, but even for me, a super shy person, it really is just getting in the door and that first hello that's the hardest part, because as soon as people hear that I want to know what they think, it's easy. It's easy. But then there comes the other thing of what happens when they say something that really I believe not to be true, or I know not to be true, right? That's difficult too. But I found that simple question of, tell me why you think that, goes a long way toward then me being able to offer up my version of the facts and my version of the world. So I think most people can do this. It's daunting, but in actual practice, it's not that hard.
And just one quick thing, because when you're face to face with someone, even somebody who disagrees with you, it's a lot harder for you to think they're a nut and for them to think you're a nut if you establish mutual respect first, which is exactly what Kathy's talking about. So establish that respect first, because then the discourse will always be more civil. And if they say something that you don't agree with, you can always come back to something that you already know that you agree upon, which is maybe you all want a better, better streets in the community, or you have something in common that you share. So that personal contact is critically important. It's a lot easier to say something bad about somebody on social media, right? Because you just type it in and it's gone. Right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
One
I
of
want
you.
to follow up on that because I recently had this similar experience. I got the mail and there was a mailing from Second Harvest, and they had statistics in there about hunger amongst children in Toma. Okay, they had all these statistics. Now, I'm a big supporter of the farm to school movement, where they bring fresh food into the schools from the farms. Now, 2 days later in the paper, it said the Walker administration wanted to do away with the money for that program. And a man by the name of Nick Lewandowski had been interviewed. And he apparently was the head of this group called the Wisconsin Farm Union. Well, I live in Madison, okay, and I have 2 liberal representatives. So I thought, oh man, I can't contact him, he's a farmer or whatever. But I did it. I went on Facebook, and sure, there he was on Facebook, and I messaged him and I said, I understand you're having a lobby day, a farm lobby day. And, it was like, can I come? And I said, I live in the city, and I have liberal representatives. Would it do any good for me to come to this? And he said, oh, yeah, come. So I went. It was right downtown at Bethel Lutheran, and I was really shy walking in, because this wasn't my milieu,
Yeah.
And everybody was super friendly, and it was a really good experience for me, but also, I didn't say anything. I just sat there at the table, basically, and listened. And I learned a lot, and I found out all their issues. The reason he had been in the newspaper was because he was upset about this farm to school thing, but they had all these other issues, and I thought, I agree with all this stuff. I mean, every single flyer they had, it was like, yeah, you know, the roads, transportation, and I'm not gonna name them all. But as I left, I said, you know, I live here in the city, but I said, this stuff's all important to me. And I think that the message is, go out of your comfort zone, but also do it with something you feel, it has to be something you feel really strong about. Like in my case, it was the farm to school issue. And like you said, go to the people, don't expect them to come to you. So there's my story.
You have your hand up?
Yeah,
Ralph?
I had a question about, Mike, you and Kathy both have had listening experience, but different kinds of settings. You've had smaller groups, very informal. Mike, you've had sometimes larger groups. And I'm curious about, it sounds like, one of the really important parts of this is giving people a chance to tell their story. I'm contrasting listening sessions to what we hear about listening sessions where you have a legislator come, and you get to ask one question, you get an answer, sort of, and that's it. This is different. But can you talk to the dynamic about the difference when you're talking with a small group of people versus a larger group of people? How do you make it possible for people to tell their stories and feel really listened to? Maybe that's a little more towards Mike, but I think you both have some commonalities there.
I think I can speak to this best from my teaching experience, where especially in this past semester, I had a mix of students in a class, meaning mixed politically. And after the election, it was was a bit of a crisis in how we were gonna have the rest of the semester together. And so I tried everything I could think of to have the students listen to one another, because when it's a larger group, having the person at the front, just like it is here, everybody in here has something to say, and you'd love to have a conversation, but it's just bouncing it back with the instructor. So I tried, I'll just give you some examples. I tried this thing where I paired people up and I said, here are 3 questions, basically. What's wrong with our political system? When did you first notice it? And what do you think should be done to fix it? And I said, person number 1, you have 5 minutes, go. Person number 2, you just sit there and listen and don't say a thing. And then you switch, right? And it's amazing what that did for people, because for most of my students, it was the first time they had ever been listened to for 5 minutes straight. And I bet many of you would have the same experience, right? So simple, tricks like that, I think they sound kind of dorky, but they can be really useful.
The only thing I would add is that I do get an opportunity to speak to groups of all sizes. And sometimes it might be 15 people, sometimes it might be 1,500 people. But the way I always approach any event is that I decide that I'm going to stay after. My wife's actually here today, and she'll often ask me when I'm going to be home from an event. And I say, I don't know. And I think it's going to be around, but I don't know. And I think she always has felt like I was lying, that I actually knew and wouldn't say. But I actually didn't know, because my habit is people will come and invite me to come and speak, give me 15 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever. But I always plan to stay afterwards, because that's when the other part gets to happen. And so I'm speaking to a group up in Green Bay, and a guy approached me afterwards wearing a Ben Carson cap. And he sort of wagging his finger at me as he approaches. And he's saying, I didn't agree with some of the stuff you said. And I said, well, I'd be surprised if you did agree with everything I said, and that's okay. And we went on and had the most wonderful half-hour conversation, and we found all kinds of common ground. Mr. Ben Carson Cap and me. And we did see eye to eye on some things, and we differed on some things, but if you just go in and talk to a group and then leave, you're foregoing the opportunity to both give them an opportunity to share some of what they're feeling, but you're also foregoing an opportunity to learn about where they're coming from. And I learned a lot from Mr. Ben Carson Cap that day. And then after talking to him, I was actually kind of chased down in the parking lot by another guy who was a local business owner. So you can tell I was speaking to a more conservative audience that particular day. And we had a great conversation in the parking lot. So talking about a venue that doesn't really lend itself to great conversation, we had a great meeting of the minds standing in a parking lot. And so to me, that's a really important part of the strategy if you're talking to a somewhat larger group, is giving that opportunity for people to come up afterwards and pester you.
Yeah, you can ask the right questions too. You know, if you're gonna start a dialogue with someone, don't start out by stating your position or giving your opinions. Ask them a question like, you know, what do you really care about in your in our community? You're from the same town. You know, what do you care about? What matters to you? You know, what do you see for the future? Ask that kind of open-ended question, and then really listen to what they have to say. You know, listen to where you have common ground. So.
Who's next? Way in the back there.
What are some of the concrete examples of what issues cause a resentment of a rural community? Are there concrete or most common issues that they tell you?
There are some, but I'm not sure it's about specific issues oftentimes. It's about a more general sense of not getting paid attention to and not getting enough money or respect. But I think when it comes to the money, what I hear most commonly is about the funding formula for education in the state. A lot of people perceiving that their property taxes or the taxes for that fund education are high and their community isn't getting it. And there's a perception it's going to suburban school districts, you know, and these are perceptions, right? I think I also probably, especially around the time of Act 10, but even before that, people having this sense that public employees get too much of our money, right, in terms of the healthcare and the pensions, and even in many of these communities, the public employees are making salaries that are on average higher than the private employees. It's a little bit hard to imagine in the Madison area, but you know, in a lot of these communities that is actually factually true. So some of those, I'd say education and, yeah, around, especially around 2010, conversations about the money going to public employees are the ones that rise to the top. But it's more, honestly, usually it's more just a general assessment of unfairness.
You know, one day I was in Toma, and then the same day I was over in Waupun. And in Toma, I ran into somebody who lived in a township outside of Toma, who said that their town board was discussing turning paved roads back into gravel. And I was over in Waupun and ran into somebody who said the exact same thing, that their local town board was discussing turning paved roads into gravel. And I thought, holy cow, it would only take one trip to Madison for a Badger game at Camp Randall, or to Milwaukee to check out the Brewers at Miller Park, and they see the traffic circles and they see the interchanges and the roundabouts, and they're thinking, that's where all our gas tax money goes, and we can't even fill our darn potholes. And that's the kind of thing that starts to breed the resentment. And then I'm in Waupun, and I run into a farmer there who said, you know, it's really hard to run a business like mine nowadays if you don't have the internet. Because I have a few employees and I'm supposed to file payroll taxes online, but I don't have an internet connection. So how do I file payroll taxes online without the internet? And I'd like to check commodity prices or stock prices, but I can't do it. Nowadays, it's really hard to run a business without that. And you go and talk to rural people, and everybody's got a story about all the dead zones and all the places where they can't get that kind of 21st century necessity. So there are those kinds of issues. And then there are the issues, and I'm sure you ran into this, where people have been fed a lot of stories to create resentment of people in other parts of the state. And they'll say, you know, Democrats are the party that taxes those who work and gives to those who don't, party of handouts. These people don't work, they live off the government. And getting back to something Scott just said, if you just try to argue with them about the food stamp program, I think you're doomed. What I've found more successful is to just change the whole nature of the conversation and say, shouldn't we be talking about how to create an economy where if you work you won't be poor? And do we have that kind of an economy? And that creates a whole different conversation. It takes the whole thing in a totally different place. And I think that's part of what has to happen is when people have been fed by cynical politicians reasons to resent other people somewhere else, we got to figure out creative ways to get the conversation to some semi-neutral place where we can again find common ground. And most people will admit we don't have an economy where if you work every day, you won't be poor. And that's something that's understood in rural Wisconsin, in inner city Wisconsin. There are people with 2 jobs who can't make ends meet. And that is a way of creating a conversation that can get us beyond what appears on the surface to be this urban-rural divide, this resentment. But there are ways to ask questions and then lead conversations to places that, I tell you, the guy wearing the Ben Carson cap, I was almost frightened how often I agreed with him on certain things.
I have a quick story as to why, the messages Mike was talking about, about how the tax and spend liberals, and you all know the metaphors, why that's so powerful. Is that in 1968, the presidential election, Republicans coined the term liberal elite. And it was in response to what? Those liberal academics pushing back against the Vietnam War, women burning bras, hippies protesting, right? And they were going to be the law and order party. Sound familiar? Yep. But it was a way to frame, to provide a different worldview for Democrats that fed into what Republicans wanted to do in terms of policy, and that is to portray Democrats and progressives as this group of liberal elitists who are just looking down on those hardworking people in this country. And so you can see how that's been going on for decades. So when you hear things like this, and when the Democratic Party has become a very urban-centric party, right, that its power base is basically the liberal elite, for lack of a better word, it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Right, so that fuels the resentment from people who, you're no different than somebody who voted Democrat in Milwaukee. You're the same people, but yet many of your neighbors would, characterize you differently. So.
Yeah.
My wife's mother is a farmer, and all day long, she's got on AM radio, 1310 WIVA. So, most of us from around here know what's on that station, what's all day long. But I think that's an important thing that, I'd like to get your opinion, but I think, I forced myself to listen to Rush Limbaugh. And I forced, I read the National Review and the New York Times. And actually, today's conservatives don't read the National Review. They read Breitbart,
Right.
and they read, a bunch of other things, like Gateway Pundit and so on and so forth. But I just think to have conversations with conservatives, you have to expose yourself to that conservative media ecosystem to understand where their world is coming from.
Yeah, so there's more history to what you're saying, is that for decades, conservatives have spent billions of dollars funding think tanks that have been training people to create metaphors and effective language and get their ideas out into public discourse to the point where they're completely dominant. There's a reason conservative talk radio works. And it's because it's the same thing over and over and over again. And it repeats the same metaphors that get physically embodied in your brain. In fact, you would probably all be shocked if I put some conservative metaphors on the board here, how many of them you understand and accept every day. I'll give you a good one. Job creation. How many of you have written a letter or commented saying that Wisconsin could do better in terms of job creation? Probably a lot of you. You're repeating conservative ideas and you don't even know it. That's why conservative radio is so effective, and why progressive radio is ineffective. Because progressive radio just talks about facts and facts and facts and issues and issues and issues. Nobody cares, right? So conservative radio is effective for that reason, but you are, my hat's off to you. Listen to conservative radio. And don't have this knee-jerk response like, oh, they're a bunch of idiots. Or, man, listen to how mean those guys are. They would, torture a puppy, they're so mean. Listen to what they're saying. Listen to the values that they're talking about personal liberty and small government. Getting government out of your lives because you will be more free. And they have driven a wall between you and your own government. Right? That's what we have to change. But that's why they're so effective. So, another challenge.
Do not overstate their power, though, or overthink their power. It's worth noting that that vast right-wing propaganda machine went to great lengths to derail Donald Trump's campaign. And Glenn Beck said, you should not vote for Donald Trump, even if that means Hillary Clinton is elected president. And Charlie Sykes became part of the Never Trump movement, and they couldn't stop him. Yes, this is an enormously powerful machine that has been built, but Trump proved capable of overcoming that machine. And so we shouldn't think that we are powerless against the power of right-wing talk radio or Fox News, because we now have somebody in the White House who was not their choice, and in fact they went to great lengths to derail him and couldn't. That's just worth remembering, keeping in mind. Yeah.
So just to echo what he's saying about listening to the station and what you were saying about the neighbors, I did get out of my comfort zone and had an experience with someone that started in social media, met him at a coffee shop, and we had the best 3-hour conversation ever. Someone that we don't agree, that seemed that we didn't agree on anything. But after that experience, it seems to me that it's easier for me personally to speak to a stranger than to family or to neighbors. So how do you reach those people or the people that you work with or your neighborhood association? So I'm struggling with that more than even the having conversations with strangers.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Okay, you don't have to answer.
I mean,
I'll take a shot.
yeah, well, I'll just say compassion is in my own personal life, just to try to put my mind in the mindset of compassion rather than this is really gonna suck. Right?
So I'll convey a story. So George Lakoff always tells this story about how he has grad school students in journalism, and they always say, Dr. Lakoff, I can't stand going home during the holidays because we fight. My family, they're super conservative. We always fight over politics. And he says something really brilliant that I think a lot of us, because we get so reactionary, right, to people's political positions, he says, look, don't fight with your uncle and your grandpa because they love you. They're family. Start asking them, ask them what they've done for someone recently that makes them happy or proud. And not writing a check to a charity. Anybody can write a $500 check to a charity that has money. That's self-indulgent. But something that you've actually gone out and done. And the reason this is so powerful is because if you're thinking about helping someone else, your brain won't let you think in your own self-interest. This is mutual inhibition. You can't do both at the same time. So don't talk about politics, talk about what they do to help people, what they do to care for other people, actions that they do that really matter, and get them on that page first. Then slowly bring that around to
The pain and suffering.
Bring that around to, what that means to democracy. Right? Don't we want a democracy where we all care about each other and do things for each other and help each other? Right? So slowly start making that transition. Because what you're actually you're looking for a cognitive shift. You're looking to change people's brains.
Way in the back.
Hi, I was on the campaign trail going door to door back home in Platteville last year for my candidate, Cramer. I came across a 78-year-old woman who just nice as pie. She said, "Oh yes, I know all about Jesse. He absolutely has my vote. I tell my friends about him." I said, "That's great." She went on to say that she still attends the church she first went to when she was 3 weeks old. She has voted them every year for 60 years. And I said, "That's great, that's wonderful." And then she kind of changed her body language and she looked me in the eye, and these are her words, folks, her words. "What is Jesse going to do about the niggers filling our schools with drugs?" And I said, "Ma'am, I'm pretty sure there is no science to back that up. You probably have heard some crime statistics, but you need to know about disproportional policing, disproportional sentencing." I told her, as Americans, it's the Constitution that makes this country great, which states that we are all equal. And further, ma'am, as a pastor ordained by my church, I can assure you there is nothing in the Bible that Jesus said which places one race above or below another one. And she looked at me and said, "I'll try to remember to vote," and closed the door. And I failed. I hit her with everything I had, and I failed miserably. What could I do the next time?
First of all, I'm not sure that it's a matter of winning or succeeding in a situation like that. But the one thing I will say is that you responded with facts and issues. So one possibility would be to take Scott's cue and try to steer that conversation more toward values, and that could lead to some common ground or understanding. But trying to simply refute what she says using facts or raising issues, that's probably the least likely to succeed. But hey, I don't think we have to go into every interaction with people thinking that we have to either come to agreement or come to value and accept what they happen to say or think. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to even be repulsed by what people might say or do, and so I don't think you should feel badly about that exchange. And that was an ugly thing that you had to encounter, and there's no prettying that up.
Kathy, what Kathy said earlier would have been, I think, my first response to her would be to ask her, why do you think that, or why are you afraid of that?
Fear.
And it is fear. And look, if you want to, again, if you come to my session or talk to me later, we can get it. But look, the whole idea of conservatism is based on a hierarchy, right? So it puts whites over non-whites, and there's this very subtle, unconscious belief that people who are minorities are less moral and disciplined than whites. That's part of the conservative Christian belief system. So this is something that's very deep ingrained within people. But maybe just a conversation of why you're afraid. Why is this a concern for you? Thursday, I think it was, I was listening to WTMJ in Milwaukee, and they were calling in, talking about all the people leaving Milwaukee County. And I swear to God, there were people who you could tell by, their calling, and they're obviously white males, saying, "I'm leaving Milwaukee County with my family because I don't want to drive around Milwaukee and get shot at." And if I'm the host, granted I wasn't, it was a bunch of conservative hosts, so they let it slide because it, propagates the fear that they want. I would have said, when have you or someone in your family ever been shot at? because I'm guessing they probably lived in Oak Creek or, Glendale or somebody, or River Hills or something like that. When have you ever been shot at? And why do you have this fear? And start digging into the fear and unraveling the fear. Because then you get to the point where you can start talking about caring for each other. Look, if you elect Jesse, he's going to be a candidate that cares about you. So he's going to be there to help you, protect you, work for the community, not for some, So that's where you can start making connections, I think. That would be, but yeah, some people, it's hard.
To flip that to the other side of the coin, when I was a very small child, the state representative for our area was a guy named Frank Nicolay, who was the Assembly Democratic leader at the time. I grew up in rural Clark County. In the last election for governor, my hometown gave Scott Walker his biggest percentage margin of victory of any community in the state. The area is redder than Waukesha County by a long shot. Frank Nicolay was the Assembly Democratic leader. He came out for gay rights in the 1960s. He was out farther on this issue than Barack Obama was in the 2008 election campaign. You recall, Barack Obama could only go for civil unions. Frank Nicolay was openly pro-gay rights in the 1960s, representing rural Clark County. And obviously, I think the average person in Clark County didn't agree with him on that issue, but it was amazing how often you would hear people say, yeah, Nicolay, I don't agree with some of the stuff he said, but he's our guy.
He's a great guy.
And they related to him, and they trusted him. They felt he understood them. They knew he would have their back, and he would fight for them and for their interests down in Madison. And they were willing to overlook some stuff. And so people don't even have to necessarily see eye to eye on some pretty important issues and still find common ground overall and actually be able to work together overall if there is that relationship that's built. And that takes me back to that idea that even a really well-crafted message will be rejected if people don't trust the messenger. And if the messenger is trusted, they can fumble and foul up the message sometimes, and yet people will still say, yeah, I still agree with that guy.
Yeah.
And isn't that the case with Trump in a lot of cases?
Yeah, right.
He would say the most outrageous and stupid things. And people would, I heard so many people as I traveled the state say that, I wish Trump would get the hell off Twitter, or, man, Trump is a gas bag, or, I really hate Donald Trump, and I thought, after I heard "but" enough times, I thought, this guy's going to win Wisconsin. Yep. And people were willing to overlook a lot of stuff that they didn't like about the guy because they somehow felt like he was more in tune with what they were struggling with than his opponent was. And they gave him lots of latitude as a result. And I think that's important to keep in mind as we talk with people, is that those relationships really matter. Building those relationships can get us past a lot of rough patches.
One last quick comment, because Mike, you just sparked something in my head. There's a great TED Talk by Simon Sinek called How Great Leaders Inspire Others. Watch it. And he has a line in there that fits this perfectly, is people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Okay? And what you do serves as the proof of what you believe. That's why people overlook Trump's things, right? Because they're buying, what he believes, why he does it, because they think he is for them.
What's the title?
Sorry, it's How Great Leaders Inspire Others.
Simon Sinek.
Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K.
It's a TED Talk. You can find it on the internet. Good stuff.
I think in part it seemed to me that they believed him because he wasn't a politician, one, and they frankly saw the fact that he was a billionaire made he wasn't beholden to anyone. And I think the third thing, he played in perfectly to the resentments of people that they had been screwed by Democratic government for 8 years, particularly in the arena of jobs. And that's what the factual answer, I'd like to see somebody put up a billboard that says it's not immigration that's killed the jobs, it's automation. But again, I know the facts don't matter. What do we do that can address the jobs issue in the rural part of the state? I have to admit to some frustration that people who want to continue to live in areas where industry is gone and there's nothing but to be luring it back somehow. I think they feel entitled still that the government should be remedying that somehow. But what can we do?
Grow hemp. Said grow hemp.
One thing that I would say is that my dad was a dairy farmer. He ended up becoming a lifelong Democratic voter because of one person, and that was Franklin Roosevelt. He believed that Franklin Roosevelt and his allies basically saved him, saved his family, saved his country. And my dad was old enough, born in 1919, that he remembered rural electrification. He could actually remember electricity being taken down back roads to every barn and every farmhouse. Well, if you go down the gravel road that leads past our old farm, you will see electric wire going to every barn and every farmhouse, but you won't be able to get an internet connection or a mobile phone signal.
Thank you, Scott Walker.
And you know, that's an example where, in terms of the rural economy, there are certain necessities that are going to have to be built out to make it possible to run a business in like that farmer told me in Waupun how hard it was to run his dairy business without the internet, and that has been a neglected need. Let me just say that neither party has offered the modern day equivalent of rural electrification. And if a major party offered and delivered on a modern equivalent of rural electrification, that would be something. That would be a start in terms of making a more vibrant rural economy possible.
Didn't Scott Walker reject the broadband money along with that?
Sure.
He did.
Money
Sure.
that would have provided the solution for at least
Well,
southwest Wisconsin.
Look, what is government? Somebody, quick answer, what's government? Okay, but do most people believe that? No. Right. So to your point, right, yes, we could have a New Deal. We have plenty of money to have a New Deal, it's a matter of priorities. But we have to convince the American people, and maybe we need a government that is of the people, that we are government. The great success of the conservative machine has been to drive a wedge between the people and their government. To the point where people don't trust government, people don't think government represents them, right? And they've completely disengaged from the process until Donald Trump on one end and Bernie Sanders on the other end. They were the same basic, filling the same basic need people have at different ends of the moral spectrum. Okay?
In 3 minutes.
Okay, so I think focus your efforts on showing people how government is what we all do together, how we all care for each other, and why that's important. That's a start.
Can I-
So, yeah.
Go ahead, Kathy.
I don't wanna take airtime, but I just wanna go back to the pastor. Do you call yourself a pastor? Or?
Yeah, pastor.
So, to your comment, I mean, that loss of a sense of government democracy is actually this thing that we all do together is why those conversations, I think, are so important regardless of the content. Even if you try everything you can to make a connection with this woman and she shuts the door in her face, she knows that you tried to have a conversation with her, right? And I think that that's really important. If we can remind ourselves that we're supposed to be having these conversations, I think that's a huge shift because we haven't really been, right? Politics has been something, for most people, I mean, this is kind of an exceptional group, granted. But for most people, it's something that happens in a distant place. And if we can reclaim it as something that, no, actually, this is something we're supposed to do together, it's just crucial. And
Let's
so
try to
important.
slip in one last question. And
I just have a quick comment, and that's sister cities. I keep thinking about why not start some sister cities from the south to the north? And a lot of people have properties up there, take your friends up there, make friends up there, get together and talk.
Try it out.
Cool. Yeah.
give it a shot, yeah. Hey, we got to send you on your way and get you to your next place, but I just wanted to first thank Kathy Cramer and Scott Wittkopf for being part of this.